Hey everyone, this is Jason, and I'm back with Leo and Allison. And so this started out as a presentation on parametric insurance, and it grew into the universe. We are now on not atomic. I guess it will be atomic at some point. Atomic ecologies or ecologies. So Allison's added a whole bunch of new stuff to this, and I know Leo has some more stuff to add as well. And a lot of this stuff I'm still catching up with some of it. So I might ask like dumb questions. So I'll be like the audience, like, wait, what? Huh?
Yeah,
So
it's perfect.
Yeah. So I guess are we starting with you, Allison? Is that how we're doing this? I mean, the first slides.
Sure, like you can do a little back and forth. I mean, essentially, I was pretty impressed that like we have like close to 2,000 views on parametric insurance. Like that's pretty awesome. Something like you don't even know about, like that 2,000 people would be like, yeah, let's figure out about parametric insurance.
Really, it's more views than they get.
Right? Exactly.
Videos, but.
Yeah. And so I'm really grateful to you, Leo, for like doing your own sort of deep dive into the Atomic Energy Commission. Because I think I said before the last session that I happened to go to New Mexico around that time. And this book really dovetailed so closely with like your investigations into the environmental movement and cybernetics and systems engineering. So like so many things started to click into place for me as I sort of swum around in your work. And then again, building off of, Jen Lake's work, like blog and Polio Forever blog about, because her deep background in the atomic energy space and the Cold War and radiation, uses of radiation, and also like staffers looking into some of the DoD nanotech and all of this. So, I was excited to build off of parametric insurance and sort of bring out of the finance piece, the systems engineering, and the cybernetics piece. And I wasn't exactly sure how it was all going to hang together because I started the slide deck a while ago, sort of framing out, building off a lot of your slides, Leo, about the main players in the space in the ecological movement. But I wasn't sure because I know you had already done a talk on that previously. And so I didn't want to do all the same stuff, but like how to continue to build off of that into this broader understanding of like man in the environment and how it relates to track and trace and sort of biophysics, because that's really like bringing people up to date with the vast majority of people still sort of focused on health issues. And that like, why should you care about coral reefs and parametric insurance and the Odom family? Well, it's because it actually goes back to a cybernetic track and trace homeostatic management that's going to involve next gen nuclear. I am conjecturing that. So I don't know. Do you have anything you want to start with, just in terms of what drew you into that space? And
well, I mean, it's kind of the same. So what originally drew me into this was looking at. Well, it was first looking at community currencies, and then there was the Red Cross was utilizing these community currencies in the parametric insurance, called these catastrophe bonds. And then that got me looking more into ecosystem services and like large scale environmental and weather modeling, and how all ecological information essentially is being quantified into monetary terms. And that's like a large scale international standard now. Like the UN just kind of they've released their like final drafts for the new standards on ecosystem services and how it relates to like GDP and how all these national statistics for economic stuff happens. So then just looking into trying to like figure out the history of that and like where did those ideas come from? Where did ecosystem services and that sort of thing. And that led me into like the International Biological Program, which I found out was pretty much run, or at least like the US portion of it was run through Oak Ridge National Laboratories. And that sort of opened up this like wide, very wide. And there's so much that I still haven't there's like a lot going on in that whole subject. But basically how like the Manhattan Project and the Atomic Energy Commission built the ecological sciences, that like all the stuff that's happening now is based off of, like, very directly.
It never ended. The Manhattan Project continues for more.
No, it totally never ended.
And I like what you were saying about the currency too, because again, that's an energy exchange system. And I think some of that, you had done a lot of really extensive work on impact finance in the humanitarian space with Cello over at Silicon Icarus. So you have, like, if people haven't checked that out, definitely, like, that's a good basis. But once you start realizing that these technicians imagine markets in biological behavior, like at all scales, both like your relationships to other people, your relationships to the environment, that this can all be monetized and tokenized. But even once it gets to the point of your DNA or like cellular function, that their goal is to create markets in biochemical processes to optimize you. And then that's where it comes into my work lately on eugenics and optimization and understanding synthetic biology, sort of suppressing that this is about eugenics and pretending that it's about longevity or precision medicine or whatever. It's like all how you tell the story and how you package it. So, so I will go on to the next slide here. So this is just as a follow-up on the coral reef, because you had a number of different impact catastrophe bonds, because I think some of your focus was on, the earlier ones were on volcanoes, like volcanic bonds.
That was the most recent one, actually. The one that wrote like the article about. That was the first volcano bond. The ones I'd looked into after that were mostly in like Mexico and the Bahamas, and I believe where earthquakes and hurricanes were kind of the main target.
And for people who might have missed the parametric piece, can you explain why something like a volcano or a hurricane would be suitable for this new model of insurance?
Yeah, so
in terms of
basically parametric insurance is a type of insurance product where the claim or payout is based purely on like a predetermined metric. So there's kind of a wide range of parametric insurance products for different things, but a subset of them are called catastrophe bonds. And that's basically the idea that a government would buy an insurance product that protects them against a specific like natural disaster, say a hurricane or earthquake. And then the way that claim is triggered is based on the severity of the natural disaster. So if a hurricane, it would be something like the wind speeds would be the quantifiable metric that triggers the insurance claim. So the wind speed would need to be like, say, 200 miles per hour or whatever, and that would trigger the payout immediately. And the reason parametric insurance is becoming so popular, or it's like having a moment right now and it's been in development for a while, is that it's based on like real-time data, like sensors, and large-scale modeling and simulation of the environment in order to sort of, how do I say, calibrate the risks and interest in all the various financial parameters based on like large-scale digital simulations and stuff. So it's sort of an insurance product, like really like built, tailor-made for this like digital economy where there's sensors everywhere and constant rebuilding of simulations continuously and all that. Yeah, and it justifies.
Like it provides a justification, it legitimizes them. It's for your safety. Like we need to have sensors all over the forest so that we know when the hurricane comes how fast the winds are, so we can protect you better the next time or something. Yeah. So it's not unlike. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I was just going to say, not unlike on the social welfare side, that they, for your safety, they need to tag you as with a digital identity so that they can fix you, and that's the new model. But ultimately, then the most vulnerable communities who are being assigned to be fixed are the ones under the most surveillance. Only now this is the version in the natural environment.
Yeah, and then I just add that the ecosystem services part comes in where like you're about to basically just talk about it, that things like coral reefs or forests or rivers, all this stuff, when they quantify it in terms of a like money value, like this river does $10 million worth of water purification services or whatever, then the insurance products, like the parametric insurance products, are all kind of based on those ecological values. In like the case of coral reefs, it's, you know, there's all sorts of things that like tourism and the, you know, biodiversity and all the, you know, various things that are obviously
man and the environment. So it's both.
Yeah.
They're controlling
both.
both. Yeah. So Jason, I can't actually see this one. I don't know if we can bump it up temporarily on that.
Yeah, that's really very.
There we go. How's that?
Okay, so this one I just wanted to mention. So the original one looking at last time that I raised was backed by Swiss reinsurance, I think, but it actually headed the coral reef program into further down the coast. The initial one was at around the southern side of the Yucatan. And so now it's down to Honduras, and it's involving Munich reinsurance. So the reinsurance companies are the companies that insure the insurance companies. And I would say for the most of us, like regular people, it never even occurs to us that there is such a thing. But clearly they're looking to expand this model. And that's good, Jason. I mentioned also the last time in the Yucatan area that there were overlaps with sort of the financial interests of influential members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And then after that, someone sort of alerted me to that the Levitt family, which I can't say that they have a lot in catastrophe bonds, but they are one of the major private insurance companies out there. So that there is this overlap within the church and the insurance, the global insurance space too. So these bonds are going to become more and more expansive. And then, I don't know, Jason, are we able to play this one? This is just a short clip to talk about like what Leo was saying, how things are valued. And the interesting thing is this is from a webinar that's actually named after Howard Odum, who was one of the key players, these two brothers that set up the systems engineering ecology movement in conjunction with the Atomic Energy Commission. So one brother, I think Eugene, worked in Savannah, University of Georgia. And then the other brother, Howard Jr., he was based out of the University of Florida, Gainesville. And his focus was on energy engineering and also water. And I think water is really important moving forward. So there's a wetland and water institute named for him at the University of Florida. And this webinar is sponsored by that institute.
All right, so why do we care so much about coral reefs? I think it's really important to kind of set the stage as to why ecosystems are so valuable. They're the most biologically diverse ecosystems in the world, and the marine environment really rival rainforests on land. And it's estimated that 25% of marine life rely on coral reefs during one stage or another in their lifespan. So that ecosystem is incredibly important to maintain that biological diversity within our oceans. But these reefs also provide ecosystem services, so direct benefits that humans take advantage of almost on a daily basis. In Florida, one of the most important ones is that our reef tract, which goes from Martin County on the East Coast all the way down to the Dry Tortugas, helps to protect our shoreline by absorbing wave energy. So as large waves and storms come in, all of our infrastructure that's near that shoreline environment actually gets protected because of the wave attenuation that occurs when those storms come through. The waves break on the reef, and so there's less energy hitting directly against our shorelines. Also, coral reefs and organisms found within this ecosystem are a source for novel compounds to fight diseases. And already we're sourcing compounds to fight things like cancer and drug-resistant bacteria, and even methods to help reduce the impacts of Alzheimer's. And finally, just kind of holistically looking at the world, about 1 billion people rely on reefs for food, coastal protection, their cultural practices and income. So a lot of people's food security and income security really rely on reef ecosystems. Now to take it more home, Florida's coral reef are a huge economic driver and the foundation of much of our ecotourism, especially in places along the East Coast and into Monroe County. The reefs help to attract over 16 million visitors to our state each year, support over 70,000 local jobs, and are estimated to be worth at least $8 billion to the state economy. I mentioned before that the reefs themselves protect our shorelines, and annually that helps to reduce costs associated with flood mitigation almost by $1 million a year. So incredibly important for our infrastructure protection.
So I think, I mean, I don't know about you, Leo, but what just occurred to me in watching this again, the first time I saw it, what jumped out was the issue of sort of bioprospecting for medicine in the coral reefs. It's also a very complex ecosystem. So if they're looking to figure out how to come up with sensor-based modeling, my sense is that the coral reefs are more suitable for the cover of parametric insurance than a rainforest per se. Like rainforests are probably going to be somewhat impacted by a hurricane, but a lot of them are inland. So they need, you know, and I don't know that they're specifically rainforests are targets of volcanoes, like somewhat, but to a much larger extent, and I think more directly trackable would be the coral reef if you're looking for a complex system to model and to have an excuse to come up with novel sensor-based technologies to get at it. And while you're doing it, by the way, you can sample some molecules and come up with some more drugs, you know, which sounds like what their plan was. But in seeing it for the second time, I'm thinking the whole situation of this in Florida. And later on, we're going to talk about Puerto Rico and the sort of nuclear atoms for peace in the way in which some of these emerging technologies were embedded, I think, very intentionally by the U.S. military infrastructure in Latin America. That if you link sensor-based technology and blockchain, and you understand that it was always driving into like a sensor-based ledger system, you know, and that probably goes back to the cybernetics age, right? Like that probably goes back to Wiener and the Macy conferences. If you know that there's some systems engineering with cybernetics, sensors, logging, tracking, then Florida, the Odom, the Howard Odom being based in Florida, and then these systems of water engineering in Florida and the coral reefs being centered, once you connect the Internet of Everything to blockchain, then you start looking at Miami, right? Like that adds another layer to the Miami blockchain story. Whereas right now, a lot of that is still being framed around NFTs and crypto, but as the Internet of Everything emerges out, the entire ecosystem services of these reefs, I think sort of deepens the Florida story as well in terms of blockchain, sensor networks, and the environment. I don't know if that, if you have.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not sure like what the context of that video was and if they are doing like financial stuff around the reef, but the way they were talking about it is the way that all this stuff is framed, and how she was talking about ecosystem services and the impact to the local economy and flood mitigation, all that sort of thing, is totally the same like paradigm that's being used where they are doing the actual like insurance contracts and stuff. And we talked about it a little bit with or we did in the other presentation on parametric insurance, but there's starting to be more like blockchain consortiums with like Munich Reinsurance and other like financial technology companies that are doing just, I mean, straight up, they're creating DAOs to issue smart contract-based parametric insurance contracts for, in that case, specifically around like crop insurance, and it's a weather index. So it's based on rainfall primarily, but yeah, I mean, blockchains is definitely essential to that. And I have it, I think, at the end. I'm not sure where the slides were moved, but the life block.
That's the sort of, we'll get to that.
Yeah, that's like the internet. What I found is like the main, that's the big like UN, EU-backed blockchain ecosystem services like platform. So I think, we'll get there.
Building up the simulation data.
Yeah. No, I have a question for you, Leo. So one thing I'm trying to wrap my mind around with the parametric insurance is, you know, typically you would insure some asset that you had from actual damage being done to it, and then they measure, this was the damage that was done. And so this is like taking it, you know, one step removed from that of like, oh, there was X number of rainfall, right? There was a volcano and the plumes went so high or whatever. And I'm just curious, like, how does, are there situations where there isn't actually any assets directly involved? Because, like, are they saying like, oh, if there's a volcano, we have assets down here that could potentially be damaged from this? I don't know. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this, because it's different than what you would normally do. Like you normally insure your assets, and if something happens to your assets, there's a payout based on the loss.
Right, yeah, the damage to the asset. Yeah, the loss. Yeah, exactly. That's a good distinction to make. And it's both like a criticism in like the insurance world of parametric insurance, but yeah, you're right, exactly. It's removed from that traditional process. So they're not insuring like assets directly. It's like the big difference is that it's like an automatic payout. And that the actual damage to assets like doesn't really matter at all. It's like it's just purely like an amount of money, and it's all predetermined in the contract about like if these metrics are hit, this amount of money will be paid, and it's assumed that if those metrics are, or it's modeled that if those metrics are hit, a certain amount of damage is likely, but there's no assessment like in traditional insurance where they go in and like see like what actually happened and like how much damage.
Well, it's completely insane. I mean, because it's like it's sidestepping.
Money's insane, Jason.
Right? No, I know that. I know that. But I mean, it's totally sidestepping the whole point of having, the whole point of insurance is to.
It's not about insurance, Jason.
No,
it's about the simulation.
I know that. I'm just saying, in terms of the story, even the story, like they still have to have a story to, at least they traditionally had to have a story that made some kind of sense.
But see, in this story though, like with the reef, they're going to say, look, in the past, we didn't have any products to insure common property. Who owns the reef? Nobody owns the reef, but we all benefit from the reef. So how do we tokenize it, right? Like, how do we quantify the value of the reef to us? And so you can see how on the progressive side, like the environmentalist side, they would uplift that as like, see, we've never really taken to full account the bounty of nature, right? I mean, that was the whole sort of Marx critique, it capitalizes on nature, right? It doesn't count nature into the equation. So now it will be counted, right? And so you can imagine that the progressives or, even the rights of nature, which unfortunately is going to be hijacked into this DAO space, right? Sure, the river has rights. We've made it a DAO. Like now we can kick out the original people whose river is sacred and say that they have to leave because the river has its own rights and the law says go away. So that's how everything gets inverted. But it's they know enough, like they have enough data to come in and want to tell us the story we want to hear. I think that's the tricky part. Like after 10 years of everybody spending so much time online and having so many data points, that they can tell us what we want to hear. They can tell us the most compelling story that will get us to do what they want us to do. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Sorry, I had to plug in.
That's all right. If you have to do that next time, just mute yourself real quick before you do that.
I forgot.
That's all right. I hear what you're saying, Alison. It's just, but it's also like, but even that's kind of crazy. It's like, hey, you need to pay me when the coral reefs are damaged. Like, who are we paying? Who is this parametric insurance paying? The reef? We're giving money to the reef.
Government. It's the government.
It's the government.
It's usually the government. Yeah, with that type of parametric insurance, like with the catastrophe bonds and sort of larger scale. Like I think California has the largest catastrophe bond like in the world right now, outstanding. I'm not sure. I don't remember the exact size, but it's for the earthquake and stuff on the fault.
San Andreas.
But yeah, the San Andreas fault. And to what you're saying, Jason, I think part of it it's that it's sold as it's not really being sold as like a replacement to the traditional insurance. It's kind of like this add-on sort of exotic product type of thing that it's not, they're not really like trying to replace traditional insurance, I guess is what I would say. And it's just like another way to have a different type of financial contract that can be securitized and also fits in very tightly with the whole, simulation paradigm and that sort of thing.
Well, I think we should create one around sneezes, because when you sneeze, there's the potential to spread viruses. So if we measure, if a certain number of people sneeze,
don't give them any ideas.
Yeah, that's sad.
My business mind's working over here. I'm thinking of some business ideas.
You don't need to get to California that bad, Jason.
Yeah, you thought you were going to California for one thing, but you're actually
we're really going to sell Jason's sneeze monitor.
Sneeze monitor. That's funny.
Yeah. So Leo, I pulled this one. This is yours. I pulled it just up for context, because we touched on this a little bit at the beginning in the introduction, but just the systems engineering, the fact that the environmental movement has been wedded for so long to atomic energy. I don't know if you had some more stuff. We touched on this a little bit briefly.
Yeah, I mean, I just, it kind of, the text here is just saying it's from a paper. I forget who the authors are, but they're like academic historians in the links there, but about how the Atomic Energy Commission was the largest supporter of ecological studies from probably like the 1950s to this, like, after the mid-70s. I'm not sure when that like switched, but and that Oak Ridge National Laboratories was one of the major centers for that and facilitating this work. And it was also where like computers were available much earlier than anywhere else. So some of the early people, like Jerry Olson is mentioned around there. He was one of the first, or some sources say was the first to have like mathematical models of ecological data, and was doing that sort of framework even before the computers, just like on hand, these like large computational models. But he had access to some of those early computers, and they were doing that there, and they kind of never stopped. But yeah, I mean,
and for me, this kind of frames out the technocracy framing a bit more, which, when I wasn't super familiar with like the technocracy construct until, this past couple of years. And then this idea of an industrial engineered society run by the professional class. But that angle tends to have a certain like pro-capital, like pro-nationalist framing that other people are coming in to engineer the U.S. into this system. And it also links in with, I'm trying to remember the guy's name, the peak oil theory guy. And he was based at Columbia. And it was embedded.
King Hubbard.
King Hubbard, yeah. So the closed loop managed circuit cybernetic framing. But if you situate it in the Cold War, right, and I think you have some slides later, and you understand that maybe just like the parametric insurance conversation, like maybe it's only a little bit about insurance. Maybe it's a lot more about sensor-based simulation modeling. For me, I'm increasingly thinking within the Cold War, like maybe it wasn't so much about mutually assured destruction. Maybe it was about trauma-based mind control and setting up weaponized space and radioisotope tracing, like metabolic tracing systems, like knowing that the cybernetics was going to come at a much wider scale, that they sought to control the whole ecology, right? Not just a lake bed outside of Oak Ridge. Like, can you say something about that lake bed, Leo? Do you remember? Like, literally, they were intentionally dumping like radioactive waste just on the ground to see what would happen.
Yeah, so I mean, like so I guess we should mention that like radioisotopes, elements that have different amounts of neutrons in their nucleus that are unstable, and then as they move into a stable state, emit like radiation that is trackable. They are byproducts of nuclear fission and uranium refinement into plutonium. So they realized that they could use those radioactive elements in order to track anything. And they sort of realized this first in medicine, like human medicine, and in the body, to understand how, cellular mechanisms and metabolism and all that sort of stuff works. But then very early on, they started sort of experimenting that in ecology, and that came like directly out of the health physics department at Oak Ridge. And Stanley Auerbach, right, there was like the first one, or he was really like hired to like really spearhead that ecological radio ecology work. And then so they were doing all sorts of stuff. They were injecting trees, they were like embedding it in the soil, they were growing crops like corn and legumes and all these different things to see like just like what would happen and where these radioisotopes would end up.
It was framed as for your health, right? Like they would both, it was like work-based radiation exposure and then the fallout exposure. So they would literally create massive amounts of fallout knowing it was bad and then say, oh, but we have to study it so we know how bad it was. Like they retroactively, rather than to not do it in the first place, they would drop, have the fallout happen and then say, okay, now we can study it all. And now we have the justification to do that studying. Yeah,
pretty much. It was a lot. It was generally framed as like, oh, we need to know what will like how this will play out when there is more fallout. So they just dump their waste and fallout into the environment. Like, oh, okay, let's figure it out.
Right. Trust the science.
Yeah, and then of course it's or we can keep going.
Okay. So just to like resituate this in today's, like, why is this relevant? Like, because I was really excited that so many people are interested in parametric insurance and like making the radioisotope conversation relevant to today is when we were talking about the coral reefs and the blockchains and the sensor network systems and the simulation. Just two recent events from the past week. Last night, the Ethereum merge happened, and that's something that both Steffers put on my radar, and you kind of helped me figure out when that was going to happen. So I ran around all day yesterday in central New Jersey going to the Bell Labs because like I couldn't figure out a better way of like documenting the shift from the Ethereum mainnet sort of high energy crypto into the beacon chain, which is supposed to be the green, sustainable. Again, this is embedded in ecology. Oh, we're doing this for the environment, like so we can run Web3 in a sustainable fashion. That this merge happened. And I think that this mesh is what's going to essentially cover not only people, but the entire natural world. It's like using emerging technologies, whatever, if today's maybe it's optical DNA sensors or something, nano antenna or in place of the radioactive isotopes, but to track all of these energy exchanges across an entire ecology, like planetary ecology. And that ultimately is what Web3 will do within the context initially of financial transactions, but increasingly towards the tokenization of everything, including your biology. And then on the other side is the executive order that was launched with Biden about biotechnology and biomanufacturing. Again, framed as sustainability, right? All of this is being framed as like, we have to, or otherwise the planet will be dead. And so synthetic biology, rather than being framed as eugenics or, like the next, essentially what they're trying to do is use molecular CAD design engineering to say that it's organic, and saying that it's better than petrochemicals or that sort of the vast, terrible legacy of the chemical industries. Like now they have organic refinement and it's so clean and green because literally we're just taking apart molecules of things and putting them together in novel ways to make who knows what. And to me, like this is the direct extension of dumping a bunch of fissile material in a lake bed and growing corn on it and seeing what happens. Like we're in the same place and we didn't learn any of those lessons. And then it's ultimately the track and tracing piece is going to be tracked within Web3, which this merge needed to happen for Web3 to function anywhere close to what they want it to do, which is not just to run money, but to run everything.
Totally. When I was looking at that fact sheet, it was like, the Department of Energy is in a lot of it. And that's, for people who don't know, the Atomic Energy Commission became the Department of Energy later on. And one of their, it was like a smallish part of it. I think it was only like 25 million, but it was for the like risk assessment and security of all these like, bio nanotechnology manufacturing plants. And I forget how the sentence said it exactly, but they're like, oh, for all the new risks and like unknowns about like this paradigm. And it's like, oh yeah, there you go. It's the same. That's the same like risk assessment, track and trace, like large scale modeling, because that's what they'll have to do to justify doing mass simulations of all these like biofoundries and nano engineering. They'll just like, oh, we have to have like a constant, simulation of what's happening in order to have like an accurate risk assessment and able to identify like areas of concern and stuff. So yeah, it's just stuck out to
the
me.
risk for sure. So yesterday, in addition, so we went to 3 places in New Jersey for Bell Labs, and they were sort of centered on a lot of emerging technology. And you think of Silicon Valley, or you think of Boston, or increasingly I was thinking about Texas, but really New Jersey, like New Jersey's niche in all of this is the signal, is frequency and signal communication and information transmission. And like for a small state, they've got a lot of stuff going on. And when we went out to the Mormon Transhumanist Conference in March, one of the presenters was Scott Stornetta, and he's a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And when he presented on, essentially he and Stuart Haber, I think his colleague, at Bellcore, which was a research division of when they spun off the baby bells, like Bellcore was its own research division for the telephone companies. They developed an encrypted distributed ledger technology, and they framed it as a time stamping document. But ultimately, if you read through the paper, and I'd be curious, I don't know if you've read through it, Leo, but like I got to the end and I don't know all the technical part, but there were these 2 options. And when I looked at them, I was like, wow, this one looks like proof of work and this one looks like proof of stake. Like the 2 different options, like one was sort of vouchsafed with random people and the other one was like cryptography. And I'm like, wait, did they plan this already in 1991? Like this was already like, they set people up in front of these stories, like the soulbound token people or whatever, but literally like this is in suburban New Jersey, like next to the Great Swamp, where this paper came out, right? And so, and also the other piece of this in terms of the track and trace, this gentleman, I can't quite read his name, Jason. He's also at Bellcore. I can't see it.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was muted. I was reading it.
I'm sorry. Okay.
It's okay. It's Nilesh. Yeah, his name is Nilesh Shah.
Okay, so Nilesh Shah. So he was working at Bellcore, and one of his focus areas was something that was super helpful at the time, like number portability. And so this idea that you could have a phone number, but if you changed your service provider, or if you moved away or something, that you could keep your same phone number, which is something that today with cell phones, we like, I'm of a generation that's pre-normalized the cell phone, but when you had a number, it wasn't as difficult if you had to change because not so many things were attached to your phone number, but you'd have to tell all your family and friends like, hey, I have a new number. So the portability was solving a problem at the time. But again, the Monday morning quarterback, looking back, like for me, what I see when I imagine number portability is that like that is going to be your unique digital identifier. Like ultimately, each of us will need to be tagged across both the real world and the digital world in terms of our interactions and with digital media and one another. And then that all is part of the simulation and the twinning. So like even looking back for such simple things as number portability, like that will probably be evolved into, your digital identity, your internet single sign-on. It will be attached to your biometric. So literally you will only have one number. And the track and tracing mechanism that is building out the granular, more and more robust version of you, digital version of you as a blockchain mind file or, twin or Voronoi polyhedra crystal is based in this very basic technology, like dating to the 80s or 90s at Bellcore when they're like, how do we move their phone number around, right? And and I'm not blaming him. Like, I'm sure this guy had probably not. I mean, maybe somebody somewhere along the line knew that that's where it was headed. I will say that Scott Stornetta, he's with the Creative Destruction Lab, which is an accelerator for emerging tech that's associated with the University of Toronto Business School. And they're, AI, neuro, quantum. Scott Stornetta, I mean, I gave him a copy of our brochure, but he can't play like the nice, friendly guy, like researcher just doing the time stamping document. I mean, at this point, if you're a fellow with those sorts of enterprises, like, that the plan is to push everyone into the video game. Like,
Yeah, and he has a venture capital company too, investing in Web3.
Yeah. And he and Haber, I think, have the oldest blockchain technical company, like Surety, I think that was 1994. Oh. So like conceptually, as if you have a broad understanding of what blockchain is, like Surety, Surety, was Stornetta and Haber's company. So it's like the old people. And my frustration sometimes in this space is that people are really focused on the Satoshi Nakamoto or the Bitcoin or things. And I'm like, I'm not saying that there's not issues with all of those, but if we're not also interrogating the foundational layers of the Web3 contracting mechanism, I think we're not going to actually understand how this operation is rolling out. If we still continue to think of it as digital money in the way we think of it, and not as simulation from the cellular level all the way to the cosmological level, like, we're going to miss huge parts of what the problem is. So I don't know, Leo, do you have any thoughts about that? Like, does that seem random?
Yeah, I wish. No. I mean, I wish because I've read that paper, but it was probably like a month ago or a few weeks ago, and there was definitely like things that really caught my eyes and attention there. And listening to Scott Stornetta talking, there was things I definitely would want to talk about, but it's not super.
Yeah, no, I don't want to put you on the spot. But like
there's one that. Yeah, well, that, I mean, what I would say for like. About that with two-factor authentication being like pretty much standard now across the internet for anything, for signing into anything of value. Like, we're kind of there, and that's usually your phone. There it used to be. It seems like the shift happened like almost in the last few months, but like it used to be that you could use your email as like the other factor for the authentication, but now it's like just your phone. So, I mean, that's pretty close. And then also with Celo, so Celo is a blockchain that is, very embedded all of this. They come out of MIT Media Lab. They focus primarily on like humanitarian use cases. They're very involved in projects working on like tokenizing ecosystem services and all these sorts of things. They work with like Mercy Corps in Africa, like trying to get farmers into fintech and AI micro workers and all this sort of stuff. And one of their main like technological features is that you can essentially you can just send crypto, like the Celo token or any of the tokens on that blockchain, to a phone number. And then that person, like without that person having an app yet or anything, can receive that from just their phone number, and then eventually, download the app and actually like use it or whatnot. But it's very much being built primarily for like in this paradigm that we have, where phones are essentially our kind of gateway digital ID. And I'd say they basically are our digital ID at this point, but it's not like super cemented or formalized yet, but it's
on the two-factor authentication, I always find it so annoying because I'm like, listen, I don't want to link my phone number up to this account. Like, I don't want to. Yeah. Like, but you could be, there was all this fear, like someone could take over your stuff, and it's like, well, I'll take that risk, like I'm okay with that. But they were like, they were just kind of forcing it down your throat, and like a lot of places, like you can't, you literally have to have your phone connected.
Yeah, I think for every financial service essentially like that you'd sign up for that's online is phone-based two-factor authentication. I'm pretty sure at this point. So
just what I wanted to sort of point out is I'm sort of envisioning as the radioisotopes, like which were they were trackable because of the radiation, right, through the system, right, a metabolic system. They were looking at how the isotope went through maybe the plant into the thing that ate the plant, whether that was an insect or an animal, how that went through the cycle into their, urine or feces and into the water cycle in the soil. Like they were trying to track it across all of the systems. And I think now, like really we can imagine that these individual communication technologies are that, right? Whether it's a smartwatch or a smartphone, like that is kind of a radiological device that allows you to be trackable and visible to the machine in all of these energetic exchanges that you have. So like, I think it's important. That's one of the connections I was trying to make, like in context with the bioeconomy and the merge. And then the next slide is, so within the bioeconomy, like I think we have to clearly understand that our bodies are not off limits anymore. Like we are, like when they consider people as human capital, and I think in the past we might have thought, oh, human capital, meaning like how I can contribute to the economy through my creative thinking or my physical work or whatever. I increasingly feel like our bodies are seen as sites of biofabrication, like biocomputation potentially, like the DNA stuff, bioreactors, like the idea that we, early on I've said, I stand with the yeast. Like I know people in my neighborhood who are yeast engineers, right? And they think that that's totally fine to like change the biological structure of a yeast to make it into something totally sci-fi, in my opinion, right? Like they were talking about, turning it into making silk, for ties or different things. And to me, like that makes the yeast not yeast anymore. And we shouldn't, like that's a profane intervention. Like we're not even having these ethical conversations about it. But to think that they're going to stop with yeast and not apply it not to just to yeast or not just to corn or not just to, other biofuels, that we will be standing somehow outside of the alternative energy scenario, that we won't be our own bioreactors or our own data storage devices within our tissues. I think I think we would be naive to make that presumption. So this is just an image. I think it's from the past year at Northwestern, where they're working with the Army on cell-free biomanufacturing. So they're actually even going beyond cellular fabrication into something that is biological, but outside of the cell. So they're even taking it into this beyond space, and it's a military program. I mean, and I that's the thing. I don't understand why, even within the past 2.5 years, that it was very clear that it was a military program for people, and they didn't, they didn't seem to pay any attention to the military was involved in the medical side of things, that, even people that you would imagine would care that the military was involved. That didn't seem to faze them at all. And so if you understand the Web3 and the tracking in the energy exchanges and the blockchain, that the healthcare digital twin is central, the digital identity. And within the space, long ago, I came across something called hashed health. Hashed Health is based in Nashville. So again, that's not right at Oak Ridge is closer to Knoxville, but there's a lot going on in Tennessee, Memphis, Chattanooga, Nashville, Knoxville. And Nashville has like a $78 billion healthcare industry, like that's national. And Hashed Health was working on both the Illinois blockchain task force report and on Medicaid. And so if we imagine, like, how are they going to get everybody to have these phones to be trackable with their medical interventions? And like hashed health is part of that scenario. And it's about mirroring the relationships and using health to get there. And so for me, and this is sort of an odd thing, I've been, I've had some challenges the past week, like with people making assertions about my character. And they're like, you must be connected to somebody. Like nobody could do all of this stuff that you do. Like this is highly suspect. And I'm like I can't even imagine why like somebody would think that anybody would pay me as a job to do the things I do. Like it seems rather ridiculous. But my answer was sort of like, if I'm to connect to anything, it's like the universe, and not because I'm better or whatever. Like, but whatever. Like I have a beat on this thing. Like I'm following this thing. We're in sync with each other. I can see it. And so yesterday when I was at Bell Labs, the first place I stopped at, it's now a co-working space. It's called Bell Works. And this site was, this is only part of it. This is the water tower. This is the really creepy water tower. Irios Saarinen designed it, and it was a 2 million square foot office building for Bell Labs for many, many years, where they invented a lot of these frequency-based technologies. And even before they built the building, they were doing radio astronomy and frequency signaling on this site. And so this structure, along with the other buildings, were built in the late 50s and early 60s. And so I was trying to get back and get a photo of it. It's quite tall, and it's all surrounded by this giant lawn of grass. And so when you have your phone and you're trying to oh, no, it's not all in. Let me go back further. And so I went back 3 or 4 stops into the grass till I could finally get the whole thing framed in. And right there in this sea of grass, which isn't trashy. I mean, you can see it's a corporate campus. It's not full of trash, not like downtown Philly where I just picked something up. At my feet was this silk flower petal. It was and you look at it, and I just looked and I go, that's cellular division. This is cell division. I know that sounds really weird, but it's not like the rest of that flower was there and it had been chopped up by a mower. That was the only trash there. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, I know what this is. This is cellular division or a mirrored twinned world that's intersecting. And, I just pull up the Britannica, image of the cell. And so that's right when right before the split. And so I feel like that's where we're held in tension in this space right now, is these people through the bioeconomy manufacturing are attempting to take biology even beyond the cell. Once it goes beyond the cell, it's not even natural anymore. It's some unnatural next generation evolutionary thing, which I think is what the Huxleys, the cyberneticists, maybe the risers, the Talhar Desjardins, Vernadskis, that they were imagining this next level of evolution that we don't even have cells anymore, right? Maybe we're just working on photonics or frequency. And this tower itself was, I'm not sure if it was officially, but anecdotally it's called the Memorial to the Transistor, because the Bell Labs was early on in the transistor space. I think they helped develop it, but it wasn't popularized until later. I think Texas Instruments, and there's a California company, they were vying to actually commercialize it. But Bell Labs had it early, 47, I think. And it made a huge difference, because instead of vacuum tubes, which had to be replaced all the time and limited their function, that this was something that would be more standardized. So I feel like the track and trace radiological forced evolutionary system is coming, and the universe is talking to me, even though that might sound weird, in flower petals, fake flower petals. And then, so early on, I think Cliff had been talking about this early on, and this is just another paper about DNA being a fractal antenna in electromagnetism. And this idea, there is communication happening, there is bioelectrical communication. And I don't think, at least publicly, the scientists are public about all of the ways that water, crystalline, DNA, proteins are actually having that communication happen, and the role in which radiation and frequency and energetics plays into that. So this is a 2011 paper talking about DNA as an antenna. And a more recent paper that I thought was really interesting was that they were looking at photonics and optics, which I've been talking about a lot. But they were rebuilding, using DNA structures, what do they call it? Opto nanosensors that are like antenna, that are for the biology. So it says like a two-way radio that can both receive and transmit waves, the fluorescent nano antenna receive light in one color or wavelength, and depending on the protein movement it senses, transmits light back in another color so that we can detect. And so again, this is all the same tracking and tracing of biological function. But I don't know many people who are talking now about optical-based biosensor technology. And as we move into telemedicine and remote medicine and frequency-based, I think this is going to become more and more important. So I don't know, I'll pause for a second. I was just looking at the biophysics, and I think biophysics, it goes back even into the 19th century, maybe the mid-19th century, and then more formalized in the 1890s. But as far as becoming more and more organized, it became more organized as a professional institution during the Cold War era. And I thought I was looking up this Biophysical Society, which is international, but no shocker there that the first meeting was in Columbus, Ohio, which is, the center of, Standard Oil, Rockefeller. And Ohio is a center in the Manhattan Project, weirdly, in terms of managing a range of radioactive processing, the Battelle Institute coordinating it, the Dayton processing with Monsanto.
Yeah, Monsanto.
Like there's just a lot. Yeah.
They ran Oak Ridge
So I'll
for a couple years. Yeah.
I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on that run of things about the track and trace? And
I do on the biophysics, but Jason, were you going to say something?
Oh no, I was saying I didn't know about Monsanto running Oak Ridge. That's interesting.
Yeah, just for a couple of years.
Yeah.
They managed it. They managed it for a couple of years. I'm pretty sure that's correct.
I think DuPont built it, but they didn't want to manage it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Right. DuPont built it. They're like, no. And then University of Chicago Metallurgy Lab ran it for that at that point. And that for a little bit, then Monsanto for a little bit. And then, I think Union Carbide took over after that.
Yeah,
I forget.
Union
something
Carbide,
like
in the 60s. And then eventually now it's back to Battelle, which is,
right.
It's Ohio. It's not Columbus. It's, or Dayton. I'm trying to remember. It's not Akron. It's one of the other ones.
Yeah, Monsanto was really big too because the guy, Charles Allen Thomas, so he started a company. He first worked for GM and working on like fuel additives, like adding lead to fuel to stop like a clicking problem that was in the engines and stuff. And then DuPont ran the like manufacturing of that additive. But then he built a company in Dayton, Ohio that I forget the name of, but it was bought by Monsanto and became like the research center for Monsanto, like their R&D experimental research center. And he became like higher up in Monsanto. And then the U.S. government too, and he was a big part of. He was just very deep in the Manhattan Project. He was at the testing in New Mexico, and he was like directly responsible for the like chemical like innovations to create plutonium and stuff from uranium. And there's letters from like Oppenheimer and Groves and stuff that like. That his work was central. So Monsanto was like very, very, very involved with the Manhattan Project. But
it's interesting too because that lab in Dayton is literally on the other side of the street from an ancient Adena mound, like the Adena mound building culture, like this sacred mound, like in literally the lab is across the street. Like what are the odds, right? Yeah, and the other thing about Dayton is it's National Cash Register. So the natural, and I think Wright-Patterson is also Dayton. So there's like aerospace, there's Monsanto, there's national. And once you understand that like maybe National Cash Register ultimately would want to run the neurons in your brain, and to me that's, like, because it's a transaction, right? It's all transaction. And I feel like some of this stuff about them trying to get at consciousness and the time stamping of the documents, which is, I'm sure you guys are going to think this is a stretch, but I talked about this yesterday. Like, I've been thinking more and more about the multiverse or the many worlds theory, which is Hugh Everett, who was the physicist at Princeton, was talking about like the branch choices, and that there are these infinite potentialities of like if you did something or if you didn't, how it branches out. And it's linked to like the Schrodinger's cat experiment. Like when you get entangled in that, like the experiment is there and you're entangled in it too. And then there's a break of the cat is alive, the cat is dead, and it branches off. And there's a ton of stuff you can see now in, even in entertainment around multiverses. Like it's something everybody's talking about. But if you understand that it's a simulation, like, and I'm curious what you think about this, Leo, like if what they're building is a simulation, and even now with the subscription models of like your hard drive or like Microsoft, like there's a time machine, right? They talk about it like a time machine. Like you could go back to your files that you had them 6 months ago and look at them how they were then, or you could go forward. And I think the simulation
like
is
you can
looking
do that
at that forward and backward as digital information. And when I went to Bell Labs yesterday, the third one, the one that's still functional, the Nokia Bell Labs in Murray Hill, they had this whole memorial to Claude Shannon, the father of information theory. And it was about circuits and relays and information processing and distribution and security. And so if you imagine that, like, imagine your life is a simulation, and like at some point they take snapshots of it and put a timestamp as a memory, and then it branches off. And then some of you, like, then they push you into the metaverse, and in the metaverse, you can be more than one person, and it branches off. But every scenario has a timestamp and a document in space-time that you could then go back and access. And then I don't know if you could access all the concurrent things that came off of that timestamp, but that's how it's starting to feel. Like if they could push us into a metaverse as a digital character, and they could stamp it not only in geography, but in time, you could go back to that time, just like the Wayback Machines, right? You can go back. They've conditioned us in information theory to be able to think we can go back in time.
We can do
and
over.
Then the question is forward. Yeah, like the simulation. If you get enough, could the insurance companies push you forward? And what does that look like? So I think that's the thing with Stornetta that's interesting is the time piece, because I don't really see a lot of people in the Bitcoin space talking about the time stamping. But the fact that I knew in my heart when I first started talking about the metaverse and the fact that Adobe was the key foundational anchor point for Silicon Slopes, literally a stone's throw. The other side of the highway is Bluffdale, NSA data center, Bluffdale. You actually have to go under the Adobe. It's built over the archway into Silicon Slopes. You have to go. You don't have to. There's a couple other entrances, but the ceremonial entrance is to go under Adobe, and which is interesting because Adobe is earth. It's actually hand tamped earth. It's the most handmade thing is Adobe, and then the University of Utah was set up out of Project Genie to create digital items and to create file compression, those are going to be permission files. So do you have the token to access that file at that stamp? And if they can make your whole memory, I don't know. I don't think I'm off base. I mean, I think the entertainment people are already thinking that. They're already training us to think that way. And so we will live in a simulation and maybe revert back or go forward based on our tokens. So anyway, that's just a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of. I mean, with blockchain, every of course, every transaction is time stamped. That's the point, and they all run their own versions of time. So.
I think that's the building or the tunnel you go through, or you have to drive through that to get over there.
It's a crazy.
Yeah, it's an unusual design, architectural design, to have to go under it, and its proximity to the NSA. So,
I mean, with
I'll keep going.
Okay. Well, actually, wait. I do want to mention on the biophysics because, so I talked about this. I think, mostly with talk with Sebs, but so with the early radium and the study of radiation and its effects on everything, it's very much tied in with the Western esoteric occult alchemy, sort of the idea of transmutation of substance, create to transmute things and that power, and that was very, very explicitly talked about in the early 1900s, late 1800s with the sort of discovery and utilization of radium and studying things. And the certain Dutch botanist Hugo de Vries, I'm not sure how you pronounce the last part. He had a theory of evolution that was called the theory of mutation, but it was all about these. And I believe you've talked about this before. Instead of the sort of Darwinian natural selection that happens slowly over time, that biology and life goes through these periods of very quick change, very fast. Mutation and evolution. Yeah, the same exact concept. And he was very influential in kind of that got brought over to the United States, and there was other early biologists, and don't need to go into all of it, but Carnegie was very involved in funding a lot of that early stuff, and Cold Springs Harbor, and there and all the fruit fly. DNA mutation through radiation research, and that was in 1908. So and that was biophysics. And there's a quote from De Vries where he literally says that radium, I forget exactly what the quote is, but it's that radium is the connection point between the biologists and the physicists, and just says it out. And the quote's in Radium and the Secret of Life by Luis Campos, I believe is his name. And he's a professor at the university. I forget the name of. But yeah, so it's pretty old.
Well, and I don't know if you can see this last line on here, but they're talking about the first guy who set up the constitution of this biophysical society at Cambridge. And it says, the last line is, an interesting note is that Williams was originally trained as an astronomer, but then became interested in the study of viruses. So, like, I feel like at Bell Labs, they were doing this early radio astronomy research there. And clearly, I'm trying to remember the guy's name who had is it the Mount Wilson Observatory in Caltech?
Yeah.
Like, they were connected with the Foundation for Integrated Education. Like, there's a huge element of radio astronomy, and it looks like we're going to California because we actually got a really nice donation the other day. So yay, we still have to keep going a bit more, but we've got our baseline. And so one of the things is this Caltech radio astronomy telescope out in, I think, oh gosh, I'm trying to think the name of it's not Bristol, maybe Bristol, California. It's up north in the Sierras. But like, I want to go see that telescope because there's something, and I feel like in some ways, since they were talking about the Edward Dewey and the Foundation for the Study of Cycles, that it was related to like solar energy, but not the solar meaning that it made crops grow and so the economy was better, but literally that certain cycles of function, of biological function on the planet were related to planetary alignments. And they didn't want to call it astrology, but like it kind of was. It was that the cycles themselves were like the dance of the spheres or the cosmic resonance of the spheres, that there was something in the frequency. And, at Bell Labs, they were doing this radio astronomy, and I don't know high level physics, but in some ways I sort of feel like the whole UFO like conversation, like that stuff that's coming up is meant to obscure like the really deep science of radio astronomy and energy, that maybe there is some sort of other energetic presence that is influencing life on this planet, but it's not people in a UFO spaceship or little green men or things taken off to a lab, but it's something energetic that maybe at some point people have been tapping into, these like beyond our sensory perception or even our tools, these energetic things in terms of figuring stuff out. And, in some ways, I think some of the conversations like tend to take it off track, that we're not actually looking at the physics of the frequency and like what life represents, like an energetic life form that we may not fully understand from a frequency standpoint that's related to things beyond the planet. So I don't know, like I just think it's all really interesting. When you go and you see these very important people have always been interested in the frequency waves, the radio waves. And Frank Molina's son, Roger, at UT Dallas, like his whole thing was at NASA, the Berkeley Ultraviolet Lab and SETI. So it is, why does the Vatican have their own giant telescope, or a couple of them? They're trying to figure this stuff out.
It's George Ellery Hale.
Yeah, Ellery Hale. We're going to have to go see that.
I had to look it up. You do, I bet. Oh.
Yeah, I know, totally.
Well, he was the father, or like considered the father of like solar spectroscopy, basically. So like the study of light waves and studying the radio emissions and all the other possible emissions from the sun. And he's sort of an interesting cat, and had a lot of like nervous breakdowns and like hallucinatory sort of things, and like very much tied like an Egyptian in nature would go into these like altered states that I thought he was like a pharaoh, and like all like there's a lot of sort of crazy stuff, but he was a big kind of mover and shaker, and I think it was either Carnegie or one of the three people that I'm sort of blanking that funded Mount Wilson Observatory and that sort of thing. But
oh, sorry, Jason, I have to, my slide thing went away. Okay, so I've got it. Yeah, well, and the other thing I wanted to mention about Carnegie, you said that Carnegie funded it. Like, he was a Swedenborgian along with Pitcairn. and this Emanuel Swedenborg was the Swedish philosopher in the 18th century, that he traveled these alternate realms and had all of these writings and created what's called the Church of the New Jerusalem, which is a small sect. But very influential, if Andrew Carnegie was brought up Swedenborgian and the Pitcairn plate glass. And I say this because Bryn Athyn, which is just outside of Philadelphia, the Pitcairn family, which was originally in Pittsburgh, but they built this massive estate in Bryn Athyn and a medieval cathedral, and they brought all of Emanuel Swedenborg's papers here. And so this idea of like a extra dimensional energetic journeying, like that was a central part of their discussion. And just in terms of bringing it up to date recently, like with this whole new, like with the merge and sort of unsettled energy around what was going on in the Ethereum space and MakerDAO, you brought to my attention that there was some stuff in the past few months that they were trying to bring their first bank into the DeFi space on MakerDAO. And ironically, the bank that they were bringing in was this bank called Huntington Valley Bank, which is literally less than a mile from where this cathedral is. And like this bank dates at least to the late 19th century. And so you would imagine if it's like a small local bank that dates to the late 19th century, it would be conservative, that they would not be necessarily the best candidate for being swept into the first bank of MakerDAO. But it feels symbolic to me. And also with the Pitcairn family, one of the sons was very involved in aviation and vertical flight and he built a runway that later was turned over to the Navy for Willow Grove Air Force Base, where they were doing high-level radar and frequency experimentation. And it was the place later on, after this guy died of an accidental gunshot wound, that the Navy took over this base. And in the 70s, I can't remember the guy's name, but he discovered like the backscatter sound, like energy sound, like waves that were used for, I have to look it up. I think I emailed it to you, but it's like subliminal frequency messaging, right? And then like there was some sound he was getting, like electrical sound, and then he realized that there was this like sound wave stuff. So there's a lot of radar frequency things embedded in Swedenborgianism, I think, in these energetics and these systems of power that are really highly occulted. And like, how many people, raise your hand if you've heard of the Pitcairns? Not many people. And yet, how is it that this small bank that is the first one to go into MakerDAO just happens to be less than a mile from their headquarters, this old bank, into this really emerging technology space? It's very interesting to me. So
yeah, that was really weird. I didn't know I just like sent that part to you. I'm like, oh, they're doing that. Or I think it was even directly about that or something else. And then like, oh, this bank.
You're like, yeah, there's something going on. There's something going on in the MakerDAO about this bank. And I'm like, oh, wow, there it is. I mean, and I will just say, like, in that same vicinity, not as close, but within 5 miles is where Stephen Schwartzman of Blackstone, and a major donor to AI development and a major presence in China, like where he went to high school in Abington. And then about 10 miles from there is where Elkins Park, where the Netanyahu family lived when they were here in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia area. So it's a very energetic sort of space. I don't know, all the stuff that's going on. I don't know, Jason, we've been talking over you. Do you have anything you want to chime in on before we? You're good. Okay.
You're muted. You're muted, Jason. Oh, he's talking.
I'm just listening at this point. Yeah, I'm just listening.
Okay.
I'm being a consumer of information here.
No, that's fine. We just don't want you to like edge you out if you.
No, if I have something to say, I'll shout over you.
Okay. Cool. Sounds good. So within the space of track and trace technologies and like ecosystem monitoring, this guy, Evelyn Hutchinson, was a key player at Yale. And actually he was interfacing and translated some of the Vernadsky stuff in sort of a tricky way, an incomplete, curated way in terms of the Vernadsky information. And he taught not Howard Odum, Eugene Odum, I believe, was a student of his. I think it was Eugene. Yeah, because I don't think Howard was his student. One of the two brothers he taught. And so this image is sort of one of these cycling systems. Like it's a map of, it says here, Hutchinson, the Circular Causal Systems in Ecology diagram from 1948, the world carbon cycle. And so this whole idea of the circular economy and the carbon tracking it goes back to 1940, guys, like at least, if not earlier. But this entire system, and they didn't have the technology to do it until they had readily available isotopes. Because in the beginning, the isotope work was done at a very small level, and it was using mostly isotopes that came out of the Berkeley cyclotron. And those were meted out very judiciously. And I would say it's important to know that the UC, University of California system, through Oppenheimer, who had been based at Berkeley, ran Los Alamos. Okay. And Los Alamos was a central feature in the Human Genome Project. And so there are these connections, like you wouldn't necessarily like imagine Los Alamos is connected to the University of California system. And I know Jen had done a lot of work on that. I didn't have any clue. And the fact that it's the University of California system, not just the system itself, but specifically that cyclotron out of Berkeley and then later. But they couldn't produce at mass scale until Oak Ridge, until they had these larger nuclear reactors that they could get massive amounts to imagine that they could track the whole ecology. So I'm just going to read this.
Was also, I was just going to add, they were also involved with a lot of early the computerized weather modeling with the NEVAC computer, which with the vacuum tubes. But they were like in their spare time, after doing weapons calculations all day, then the scientists would do their fun weather simulations on that computer during like midnight and stuff. But yeah,
wow.
I just add that because the weather
is a whole thing.
Is very tied in with all this. I don't think people quite. I mean, some do, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm just getting a sense of all of that in the simulation stuff. So this is, I think, a linked paper, but it says Hutchinson had gestured to the tight link between ecology and biochemistry when he wrote in 1940 of the quote-unquote metabolism of the community, even as he, like Tansley, rejected the assumption that an ecosystem behaved like an organism. The Atomic Energy Commission funded ecologists and biochemists to refine cycles by radioisotope tracing, and they produced similar diagrams of nutrient cycles and metabolic pathways, for example, the Calvin-Benson cycle in photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is a really key area, and I know, Leo, I think you've talked about this before, of unlocking these metabolic processes. But for me, as we move into the whole sustainability and like novel molecular engineering, I sort of foresee this future where they're trying to make everything photosynthetic, right? Like that's going to be the new solar panels. Like we'll just sort of cook up a soup of everything, even if it's not meant to be a plant. Like we'll just kind of make it kind of like a plant, even to the point of like I've had people that have approached me as being targeted, and they feel like they've been colonized by different sort of like fungal or other sorts of systems that have integrated in with their biology. And I feel like at some point, like they might be like, hey, the most sustainable thing is for us to all turn it kind of into plants or something. And like, what's to stop them if we don't actually have these conversations now and say like, that's actually unethical. You know how you did that to the yeast and made it make silk? Like, we're not that. Like, we're something else. We're made in our own sacred form, and we should not be messing around in that space. But the whole carbon nutrient cycle is really central. And if you understand it as tracking a metabolism, or the whole integration then of the agricultural system, which again, you've talked about, Leo, in the past, of managed industrial agriculture, and the food systems, and the cello, like the way in which the World Food Program and the agricultural programs and the microinsurance around agriculture all becomes integrated, because it's all part of the larger social ecological metabolism.
Yeah. And I think it would be helpful to, just adding that, like the radioisotopes they were a big part in a lot of just like scientific and medical discoveries in general, and specifically around photosynthesis, sort of unlocking the chemical transformations that they just like weren't able to figure out before. So just in terms of what you're saying, it played a really big part in providing a foundation for that. But,
yeah. And I don't know, I had never seen this picture before. This is from the Macy conferences. So this image has Norbert Wiener in it, but evidently Evelyn Hutchinson was there as well. It was sort of like some sort of seance-y kind of thing. And these are the cyberneticists, right? These are the people who are looking at sort of control mechanisms and also consciousness and regulating and managing and engineering life systems on the planet. And this was in 1946. And so Hutchinson, I think his diagrams are really central to this idea of the circular economy. And, there are some aspects of the circular economy that don't sound terrible to me. Like, sure, like we should, try to address planned obsolescence or the right to repair or, being more sustainable. But the fact is like when we look at what the recycling industry has become, they all nudge and reward us for recycling, but most of it still goes in a landfill. Like the structure isn't fixed. So we can say all day long that we're trying to do things to fix the problem, but we're not actually fixing the problem. And so this is just a quote I included that was talking about him at this Cybernetics conference, that it was coming out of research on missile guidance mechanisms. The cyberneticians touted circular systems as a key to self-regulating processes, self-orienting systems and organisms, and self-directing personalities. That's interesting. And made feedback a hallmark of cyclicity. Hutchinson linked biogeochemical and biodemographic modes of ecological analysis by their responsiveness to negative feedback. And so I think it's really interesting if you all of the uses of self-regulating, self-directing, because that's the stuff that the blockchain tokens are going to talk about. Right. They're going to make it sound like you have freedom to self-control. But it's all within a feedback loop. Like you only have the choices that they give you within the feedback loop. And so to me, this ties back a little bit to the conversation Jason and Lynn and I had about the Biden speech and the new democracy. Like a self-regulated, self-governing, self-coordinating, that's the swarm intelligence, that's the stigmergy, that's the using data that's visible to the machine to nudge us and shape us into some sort of optimal direction. And within that biogeochemical and biodemographic, increasingly, I think that it's going to start using the simulation and predictive modeling to start like speeding up evolution. I mean, I think that's what they think they're going to do. I'm not saying that they could definitely do it, but in their minds, they talk about gamifying biological processes, which would be in terms of optimization. And they might say like, hey, all your blood cells can self-regulate towards some optimum thing once we put the nanobots in and we can get all of their collective intelligence to like balance you out in a homeostasis. But that aspect of the cybernetics is really, really central to understanding everything, both from the cellular level in your body up to an ecological level, and then tagging and tracing all of the bits and pieces, the environment, the niches, the niche, whatever, the niches in the ecology, who's doing which parts. So.
Yeah, well, I'm still finishing this book on protocol, but just reading about distributed versus decentralized. But there's even in this book, they're saying, oh, this is actually going to liberate everybody. You're not going to have a controller, but you still have this protocol. You still have this, there are guides that are built into the system. So it's not the idea that this is, you're self-directed, or, it's just a lie. It's not true. There are borders,
Yeah, it's a total illusion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of really smart people that are working on it, totally really believe that this is a thing of liberation. And it's really incredible to me.
But it's like optimization. It's a techne. It's not, it's assuming that there is one optimal state. Either for a community or for people, or that someone else can make that choice.
Right. Well, that was my problem with utilitarianism, which is, there's a lot of assumptions about you're this all-knowing, all-seeing, I know what, I can make the decision of what's, what is best based on numbers, based on the number of people or whatever that are benefited from it. There's a lot of assumptions that are built into that framework. Anyway, but I guess they say if you have enough data, you'll.
Aspect too, yeah. I mean, to me, that they would even have this picture out in circulation, like, says a lot about, like, and for me, again, looking at Berggruen, looking at these people who are working in metaphysical spaces, like, more and more nanotechnology, these emerging technologies, like, what's the difference between this stuff and metaphysics and these sort of alchemical, like, it starts to get blurry.
looks like a seance to me.
Yeah,
it does.
Another image right when I first saw that was, the film, the Kubrick film, Dr. Strangelove came to mind when I saw that, the round table but anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Just from an imagery.
So again, this is just hitting again upon that, and there's some links in here. So I always encourage, like, we'll put the links in the, pin the slides to the comments so people can look at the original sources. Cause we don't know all the things, we're still learning, but look at it and see what you think. This is essentially a document from the Chemical Landmark Society looking at radioisotopes and what was going on with Oak Ridge National Labs. And to one side, it's looking at the circle in the middle. That's the man in the biosphere project, their 50th anniversary. So this stuff has been going on for a really long time. And it's interesting to see all the Scandinavian interest there, because Norway is really central in the digital public good space, and Sweden as well. Ericsson, there's a lot happening in Scandinavia. And one of the things you had looked at, Leo, early on was, like, the biosphere reserves and the Smoky Mountains, which is not far from Tennessee. That was one of the early reserves. And that in the Man in the Biosphere, they've got this ankh that's built into their logo, and it's still there. And so, like, looking at it like that, again, some more occulted, esoteric information that's put right out in your face, about managing these systems. And so this bounced me back to sort of like where I was in the first 6 months of the lockdowns, of looking at the DNA nudge band, because it's gotten more sophisticated. Actually, it has gotten, like, less interesting. I think they figured that the wearable technology with the goofy, clunky orange, like, plastic bracelet was not a good look. And so they just decided to put the app on the phone, which is where people want it. But this is part of the nudge optimization of communities, like the community ecologies. And the DNA nudge band, I had found it originally because I was looking at blockchain food assistance benefits and the way that they were going to incentivize so-called healthy food choices. Although we know increasingly all the food is being engineered. So, like, once you come up with precision food and precision nutrition, like, and you're someone that needs food assistance, like, you're not going to have that much choice of the food that you get. And this DNA nudge band is that it takes a blood sample, a quick little blood sample. And this thing is like a portable PCR test. And so what it does is it looks at your metabolism, and it reads your DNA, whatever that means, and then it's going to give you nudges for your skin, for your activity levels, for your nutrition. Now, and when I first saw it, it had this sort of clunky bracelet that you would wear, and it would, if you went to the grocery store, you would scan the food and it would tell you if it was a good match for your DNA. But it's total, like, social progressivism eugenics. And, like, and again, it's not going to solve the problem for the most at-risk people, because the people who need the food are the people who often live in food deserts or can't get it, or don't have money to pay for the price point of the food that is healthy for them. So it's just a lot about data collection and shaming and controlling and developing this surveillance, not unlike what they're going to have with the ecosystem services. But yeah, so that's the DNA nudge band, and it was all on blockchain, but again, like, on your phone and giving you apps. So I just want to emphasize too, again, on the like the esoteric stuff, like, this is how they literally describe it, where the magic happens, right? And so they're very intentional about how they message this stuff, but really they're using samples of your DNA, and then they call their portable PCR machine, they literally call it a nudge box. The nudge box will scan your DNA, and in 90 minutes send the results directly to your smartphone. But don't worry, your sample is destroyed and it's perfectly confidential, right? Except it's on your smartphone, which sounds exactly what we've destroyed your sample. Now it's on your phone, which is your ultimate.
And it was not intercepted anyway. I want to real quick just let the people that are watching this know, like, the clothing changes here, just so you're not like, wait, what happened? We're recording this, but we stopped to take a little quick break, so some people put a jacket on and whatnot. So that's about. That wasn't like there wasn't like a rift in the universe, and like there was a split.
There might be. Where is this in the simulation?
We are now the digital twins. No.
Jason's the only one that's still solid.
Yeah. You guys took off.
Rock, they couldn't get to him, but we weren't so lucky.
But I just want to draw the connection, if it's not obvious, that the track and trace technology, I believe, is a direct extension of the radioisotope tracing, like the modeling of social systems. Like that's clearly it. And they're I keep pulling this out, but man in the biosphere, they want to know where you are in relationship to other people and in your environment, because they want it all traceable for the scene that's coming up. So there's the onc there, and just reducing life into this small zone. And this health event and the financial interest behind it and the tech interest behind it and the modeling interest behind it are central, right? I mean, here's and people see that it is a trigger also for climate and conservation, that there is this connection between public health and the environment. I think a lot of the stories people tell are missing this huge chunk about the origins of the system. And so they make it ideological, right? If it's right or left, and they're pointing fingers, mostly the people who are questioning it are more on the side and saying like, oh, it's the eco-fascists or whatever that are doing this to us. But that they have their celebrities, the Greta people are up there or whatever, but it's a structure. I mean, sure, they throw people up in front to be the fronts for these movements. But it is a technical system that goes all the way back to the cybernetic era. So, if in one of the articles says the COVID-19 pandemic is a pivot point for biological conservation, and then looking at how humans impact nature. So that's literally what the biosphere projects were about, man and the environment. We want to see how you relate, and then they're going to use fear and safety to keep people apart and to engineer both systems. Both, Leo, you've said, you've done a lot of research into that interspecies currency, right? And so the health aspect and the finance aspect and the risk modeling, both for climate and health, are going to be central to that. And it is a cybernetic modeling system that uses tokenization and uses money to make those relationships visible and to use it as a control and governance mechanism. But it's not just about the money. It's about something bigger. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that piece of it? Like, tokenization.
I have slides. I do, but I think first
we'll bump through. But
well, I just want to say, like, with the International Biological Program, which was basically done in concert with Man in the Biosphere Program through UNESCO, that a part which I didn't even know existed till like a few days ago when I was looking more into things, is that the IPB had a whole like subsection that was all about like human adaptability, and they did like genetic research and all sorts of like morphological or like integrating essentially indigenous people into their ecological circuit diagrams. And they were doing a lot was in the Arctic and in South America as well, but I just didn't realize there was a huge human component of basically tracking and tracing and gathering data on indigenous people and how they interface with the environment and adding that into their like ecological cybernetic diagrams.
Ooh, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've come across, like a couple of papers, because in addition to the Arctic, I think like Polynesia and the small islands are a big focus of blockchain and climate, because they're like, oh, when the oceans rise, all these people will be displaced, and they're small and they're not heard because they're small communities and they're decentralized. So they're really, blockchain is a huge piece of that. But the other element, like I've seen certain papers that talk about, I know this sounds strange, but like the paper, it was out of Brigham Young. So, for what it's worth, that's the context. And it was talking about Polynesian culture as a model for interplanetary colonization.
What?
And I think it's because it is widely distributed and yet cohesive. And so the indigenous knowledges of Pacific Island culture had a tremendous resilience, even at distant geographies, that there was some way of encoding their culture across distance and time in a decentralized manner that I think fits what they imagine as a distributed system, or a system of distribution that could be off planet or in some other dimensionality or something like that, which again, when you look at and you see who blockchain alternative like community currencies are targeting, there is a lot in that space, in that particular geography. And so like maybe it's just out there, but this stuff has always been melded with this idea of, even down to Trent McConaughey. I mean, that's what he's talking about, like get on your mind file and we'll send you to Mars kind of scenario. So anyway, I'll try to hustle so we can get onto yours, Leo, before you get kicked out. Somebody just sent me this thing about just the NHS and the future of healthcare and digital healthcare. So I think telemedicine is clearly the game plan, AI, quantum, but with optics and photonics, like, are they going to start potentially, like, is your teletherapy or your VR headset going to start potentially optically attempting to change the structure of your DNA through optical biosensors? Like, these are some questions that I have in terms of remote medicine and where it's going. And then within Oak Ridge, this is just another interesting image that I found. It's actually JFK and Jackie Onassis at Oak Ridge. And so they're looking at something, and he's a senator at the time. But later we'll talk a little bit about Milton Eisenhower, who was the head of Johns Hopkins at a time when they were launching a lot of this Cold War atoms for peace stuff. And Milton Eisenhower, who I'd never heard of before somehow until I went to Johns Hopkins and realized the library was named after him because he was the president, Dwight's brother, not only was a low-key political advisor to Eisenhower, who created ARPA, right? But also to JFK and Johnson. And so once you understand that what's coming within the data analytics space is health and human service data, like the whole progressive great society scenario starts to look a little more creepy once you meld it with like emerging tech cybernetics, I think. So anyway, this image of JFK and Jackie at Oak Ridge is interesting to me. From him. And this is just an image from that report if people want to look it up about this NHS transformation. This person who emailed it to me was speculating about the NHS being a test bed for this. And I've said this before, that socialized medicine is a target both for pay for success finance, but which is managed through data analytics and predictive modeling. Part of using AI, genomics, and sensors, and virtual medical coaches. So this DNA nudge band is essentially going to be your virtual medical coach. It is it is your nudge box, right? That's keeping you on your pathway within the homeostasis of the entire controlled planetary computer. And so I thought this was very interesting. So when I went to Belcore and I found the paper, like on Stornetta and Haber's paper, it has the address. And so it's like Belcore at 445 South Street in Morristown, New Jersey. And so they're not there anymore. But I went there yesterday to leave my heartfelt offering before the merge. And like I was noticing what else was now at 445 South Street. And three of them were insurance companies, Leo. So Travelers Insurance, Arch Reinsurance, and this other one, McLaughlin something. I can't really read that other one, it's too small. There are three insurance companies. I think Covanta is a sustainable waste management system. And then the other one is like the Chinese American construction company. So they're very big into like China.
Martian McClellan. McClennan. McClennan.
Yeah. Martian McLennan, and then the Chinese Construction America group is at the one at the bottom. So that's probably Opportunity Zone. They're working on Long Island Railroad and some other things. But I thought that the presence of all these insurers, right? Because that's what New Jersey is. Like New Jersey is like, you've got the Edison Labs and the Bell Labs. You have the military signals intelligence. You have big pharma and you have insurance. And the big insurer there is like Prudential is the big behemoth. in the space. And so as I'm driving, so I go from Bell Core to the Nokia Bell Labs, which was Lucent Alcatel. I was just looking, and here's, one of their many things about 5, 6, 7G, all the Gs. Can novel optical sensors detect the next pandemic? Right, so they're already moving into the optical biosensors, like light-based communication. That we are resonating not with natural photonic systems, but with their controlled photonic systems. And so I'm driving down 202 south through New Jersey on my way home at the end of the day. And it's just like bam, 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 like all the pharmaceutical companies, like giant campuses, Johnson & Johnson, Johnson & Johnson, Janssen, like there were 2 of each of those. And there were some other ones like, and you just realize how interconnected it is, the signals, the big pharma, the insurance, the military, that all of the pieces are working. And like New Jersey is not a super big state. And it's all literally on the land, which is my toolbox, right? You go and you look, and the land will tell you, if you have eyes to see, if you have the context, it's not hidden. And yet every day, and I'm not saying the people who do these jobs are evil people, but they don't actually know where it's going. And even if they did, it's hard to figure out how to disentangle from it.
Fun fact, in my early 20s, I sold travelers insurance. I worked with a company called Parametric, which was kind of like a multi-level marketing company, but we sold term life insurance and then some like mutual funds. But at the time, Sandy Weil, who was the CEO of Travelers, I don't know where he's at now, if he's even still alive, but he was like the highest paid CEO in America. But anyways, I just kind of laughed when I saw that Travelers thing. There was a time in my life where my dream was to actually get rich. Just getting involved with the multi-level marketing.
All the tokens.
Company is not the way to do that, by the way.
Right. Well, the New Jersey thing is.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's just I didn't realize, because that's been kind of coming up. So first, like the volcano catastrophe bond that sort of sent me down this path. The third-party modeler, and for all the parametric insurance products, there's always like a third-party data modeler that. And like financial modeler, it's usually connected to determine the metrics and like verify that actually happened and they sort of authenticate that.
Right.
And there was this company called Mitiga Solutions, and the guy who started it, whose name I'm forgetting right now, but he went to Rutgers and then worked for the state of New Jersey for several years before that. And then another company, which I don't know if you've heard of, V-Risk. I might have talked about it last presentation, if you haven't. So they're like a massive, I need to look more into them. They're, thousands of employees, data and risk management solutions companies, super broad. But they own a company based in Boston called Air Worldwide. And they were the first ones to do catastrophe modeling for the insurance industry in the late 80s. But it was one woman who predicted that the fallout of Hurricane Andrew, the insurance claims would be over $14 billion or something. And everyone's like, oh, you're crazy. It won't be half of that or whatnot. And then turns out she was right. And then suddenly the insurance industry was all into that type of modeling. And then this company V-Risk, which is based in New Jersey, now owns Air Worldwide and a couple other Massachusetts-based companies that are entangled in the environmental modeling stuff, including one called, I think it's Atmospheric Environmental Research, AER. And they were really involved in the DoD and early satellite research in the 60s and 70s and stuff. And there's a lot there. But I didn't realize that about New Jersey.
Living in the machine, living in the risk machine.
Yeah. That is.
Oh, and I forgot to put this image at the top. It's about Health and Human Services and the Department of Defense collaborating with Johnson & Johnson through their Janssen division. So again, this is August of 2020. So it's right in your face that this is a Defense Department program. It's just right there. I think that's the one that they ended up withdrawing because of complications. But it's just, I I guess they had enough heart injuries that they could move on. And this is just touching back on the homeostasis, like the whole chaos and order. And I think, I can't remember where I talked about that, if I talked about in parametric insurance or in the Biden one, but this idea at the intersection of chaos and order is where emergent things come out, whether it's life forms or ideas or other things. So they're trying to manage, this is Irvin Laszlo speaking to the Baha'i about peace, but hypercycles. And you know what, I might just read this one. Let me see. It is important to know just how systems can form on the successively higher organizational levels. Scientists have observed that when sufficiently complex components such as heavy molecules, protocells, and cells are exposed to a certain kind of energy flow, they tend to become organized to make ever more use of the incoming energies. And as the flow of energy continues, the basic chemical reactions form self-maintaining cycles. And then these cycles tend to interlock. And the interlocking cycles maintain a structure and power the function of the components together. As Nobel laureate physicist Manfred Eigen discovered, such cycles known as hypercycles are the basis of all processes of life. And then later on, he goes to say the loop may involve a large number of elements. Ultimately, it closes in on itself, forming a hypercycle that is remarkable for its fast reaction rates and stability under diverse parametric conditions. It creates new systems that have unity through diversity. Evolutionary convergence is thus the greatest relevance to the future of humankind. And so that's what I had put in there because I think really the parameters, in some ways, I'm not saying there's a direct link to parametric insurance, but there is like a pulsing of a crisis. You create a monitored simulation with something that you're tracking and you're seeing where the patterns are emerging. Because what they're saying is like you'll bubble up with a pattern and then another pattern, and then those patterns will interlock, and then they'll have enough energy to hold their pattern, and then it will continue to build. And that these folks are looking like the Teilhard de Chardin, Vernadsky, Reiser, Stroman, you know, who knows how many other people of this new evolutionary process. Probably they imagine us evolving to something that's beyond a physical body, into like an energetic or an alternate version of ourselves that are more open to a collective consciousness, like swarm consciousness element. And they're going to frame it as peace and sustainability and climate. And yet none of us are willingly, I mean, the vast majority of people have no clue it's even happening, so they can't actually give informed consent to any of it. And the shocks of energy and the hypercycles, I think, are coming from things like crises, like nature, weather crises, which can be, you know, they can certainly put their finger on the scale to tap into those. Whether or not they can create them out of nothing is another question, but they can certainly steer a lot of processes, both seismic and, you know, weather related, and then also economic crises and war crises and social systems crises. Like the past 2.5 years has been a manufacturer crisis to create emergent new patterns of behavior. So that's just that with the parameters. And this I guess this is Manfred Eigen. And so they were talking about growth and biochemical exchanges, like the biochemical roots of life. And so yesterday when I was out, before I even went to Bell Labs, because I try to start in nature, and I found that not far from the Holmdel site, the first one, that there was this fossil bed. And it was an ancient, like the ocean. It wasn't that far from the Atlantic, but this area had been inundated in the Cretaceous period. And you could go to this park and they allowed you to get a few fossils of shells and coral, which is relevant to the conversation. And they said, well, if you see, these are the shells, but then there's also this iron that comes up. Because of the geology here, the chemistry is that it builds in the karst and in the kind of limestone, and it creates iron. And you'll find it just sitting out, like these iron deposits, but it's not like organic, so it's something else. But this is this active biogeological chemical stuff happening. And I feel like they imagine through these energetic economic hypercycles that they can bring things to life, that they can push Vernadsky's ideas. And that there's a reference here to a hypercycle economy, the greenest economy being a hypercycle economy. So I feel like increasingly they're going to use the economic systems to start meddling in with biological systems. Like that's what the bioeconomy, I think that's the baseline of the bioeconomy that they're talking about. it's not just making stuff out of molecules and calling it organic and green and selling you new shit. It's actually using economic principles to control our biology at a very, very granular level. I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on? Chime in.
Yeah. No. By the way, I lowered your thing because you froze up. So I'm adjusting it as we go along to see, what's going on. Yeah. I have nothing.
I'll keep commenting. Okay. Oh, here we go. Here's the economy.
Good timing.
Our favorite economy clip.
Yeah.
We don't have to necessarily
understand this fungal behavior and understand how we can use this information as we face all of these changes in our climate. Now, these are symbiotic fungal networks. So what they do is they're exchanging carbon that they get from root systems for fungi, for phosphorus that the fungi are foraging for in the soil. Now, there's billions of these hyphae under an acre of forest, and there's tens of billions of these hyphae under an acre of grassland. So they are incredibly, incredibly vast. So anywhere between 30 and 50% of the living biomass of these soils is these arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Now, I think a lot of people don't understand just how much this leads to intense carbon stocks underground. So this is a paper that was in Science in 2019, and it just gives a snapshot of what you're looking at in terms of carbon stocks of tropical rainforests versus tundra underground. So understanding the underground is really paramount to our future. Now, here's another tool that we're developing in our lab that allows us to actually make these X-ray 3D scans of the interactions between fungal networks and roots. Now, this is really important for all different kinds of domains because when you think about it, it's up to about 80% of the phosphorus in plants is provided by these fungal networks. Now, that's exciting because what it means is that the DNA that actually makes up our own DNA, human DNA, is mostly made out of phosphorus that first passed through a fungal network. So what we're trying to do is understand the strategies of these fungal networks, right? Our lab is interested in trying to track resource exchange between plants and fungi, trying to quantify how much of that resources are exchanged, and then predict, right? Predict how these underground flows are going to respond to climate change. And in that sort of looking forward, we're at this really interesting part of biological, I'd say, history, where we're moving from a very old sort of paradigm of microbial behavior as sort of standalone asocial organisms to microbes as social actors, right? Performing very complex behaviors. And this is how we're approaching the study of fungal networks. So we're really interested in trying to understand how information across these fungal networks, how it's processed and how it's shared, and how that leads to different strategies across different types of fungal networks. Now, when you think about it, symbiotic fungal networks, they have to do a few different things, and these things are very complicated. So that's why it makes it a really interesting model organism to study. So first, it has to create an infrastructure, right? It has to create an infrastructure to actually go out in the soil and collect resources. Next, it has to evaluate where you would actually transport those resources for trade. And next, it has to collect payment for those resources to get a good price. So again, these are all the types of strategies that we are focused on understanding. Now, the problem is that we've been very focused on looking at fungal networks in a laboratory setting. And what that means is that we don't really understand the context of trade, right? Trade strategies are predicted to shift, even if there's just a small change in, let's say, available resources in the soil, or how fast a plant may be growing, how much photosynthesis is happening above ground. And bringing up that type of complexity is very difficult, right? We don't understand the chemical, the physical, the environmental stimuli that's actually mediating these trade strategies. And so this is my first meme I've ever done in my life. But I like it because it's really a bit about a poker game, right? So this is what we're trying to understand, is this trade for carbon to phosphorus. And you've got the plant root on one side and the fungal network on the other. And they've been doing this for 450 million, I get shivers thinking, 450 million years. How could we not be studying the strategies that have evolved, right? And so this is me in the corner, just trying to watch. And I would argue that a lot of what's been happening is in the dark, right? And these systems is totally underground. So it's very, very hard to understand and track these trade strategies. So what we've been trying to do in my group is actually try to visualize trade. And it sounds like a big task, and it is, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But one of the tools that we've been using are these in vitro root organ cultures, right? So this is what you're looking at right now. And you're looking at a plant root that has no photosynthetic top, right? This plant root is growing on an agar medium. It gets its carbon from the media, and then it converts the carbon into a form that it can feed the fungal network. So what's important to know about these networks is that they're called obligate biotrophs, right? It's a big word, but basically it just means that they rely on their host plant for all of their carbon, their sugars and their fats. And so we grow it in the lab, in this system, where the fungal network is in this very pristine environment, but it also allows us to have an extraordinary amount of ability to manipulate the situation. And the next sort of technique that we have been working with is a technology called quantum dots. Now, quantum dots are these semi-conducting nanoparticles, and they fluoresce in very pure, bright colors when they're exposed to a UV source. And we can tag those quantum dots onto resources, like apatite, which is a rock form of phosphate. And what this allows us to do is actually then study how resources are moved across the network, because you can use different colors. So right now we've got about 3 colors that we can work with, and this allows us to sort of change. For example, we can add the different colors at different times, or we can add the colors at different places in space. And then we can for the first time, sitting at that poker table, kind of understand the strategies that these fungal networks exhibit. And over the years, we found some very interesting strategies, right? And you have to remember, these are all strategies that have existed, right, without cognition, all in the absence of cognition. So we found that fungi are very good at discriminating among plant roots, right? They can tell a plant that's giving them lots of carbon versus one that's giving them very few carbon. We also know that when you reward fungi with carbon, this triggers more cooperation. So in this case, it provides more nitrogen. The fungus ends up giving more nitrogen to the host root. One of the most interesting ideas is this hypothesis that fungi can actually restrict the autonomy of root systems. So what that means is that the fungi can get into a root system and actually down-regulate the ability of the plant's own nutrient transporters to take up resources from the environment. So basically hijacking the plant's own nutrient uptake system. But that works perfectly for the fungi, because then they're getting plenty of carbon, and the plant becomes even more dependent on the fungi.
Yeah, I'm
so sad. That makes me so sad. I forgot how bad it was.
Yeah, every time I watch it,
it's everything that we've...
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, it's just everything that we're talking about pretty much puts in.
Well, and I've read a lot, reading a lot about money and economics over the years. Like it's clear, like that economic thinking has inserted itself into other areas, and this is such a clear example of that. And also, like, a poker game, it's about winners and losers and domination. In a poker game, you don't leave the poker table as a loser. Some people lose their homes at the poker table. Anyways, it's such a twisted way of looking at the world. But like, these are the people that study it. But I remember hearing about, like, one of the things to sell, like, complementary currencies was always talked about, like, oh, in the forest, there's a sharing. It's more of a sharing economy. But this is obviously a very different view of that. It's more just, it's a poker game. disturbing.
But even if it were sharing, Jason, I mean, it would be sharing so that it's visible to the machine. Like that's what the dots are for, is that you can't have, like, it's an accountability to a digital space. Like there's always a digital panopticon wanting to decipher what the meaning is behind the transfers. Yeah, it's just, and they don't say where it came from. Like none of this, like they don't say, oh, this field got started back when we were trying to program animals, or, you know, or even looking at like the little root in the agar and creating this environment that they could manipulate it. And like, I feel that that's, you know, I've talked a couple times about these artificial societies. Like, I feel like the metaverse is the agar plate. Like they want to lure people into this place that they have far more control than they do in the real world, and then manipulate them and run these simulations on these artificial societies and see how their different hypotheses pan out. And I feel like we're meant to be the beings in the petri dish, but we're just not recognized. Like we don't have a framework for even understanding it like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And the part about how, was it 80% of the phosphorus that a plant incorporates is from the fungal networks, and like that's where the phosphorus for our DNA comes from. It's like, you know, I like.
Well, now the whole like green revolution, right? Like the Ford Rockefeller funded green industrial agriculture starts and Monsanto, right? Like all this stuff, the petrochemical fertilizers, like you are what you eat, or you are what is in the soil around the things that you eat. And like these new synthetic biofertilizers, right? What does that mean when you start to have things that you can turn on and off remotely? You know, I'm sure they've got this stuff all shot up with quantum dots. You know, like what are they going to like hold a black light over our head, like wand over us, and like figure out what's going on in our biology? Yeah. It's really overwhelming. Like I don't really see a lot of people talking about this stuff. Like this is optogenetics. This is light. This is light-based communication. And again, she's literally saying how little they know. She's just saying like the world is so complex and amazing, and we just know like a tiny little fingernail of it. But we're going ahead with it anyway. I mean, that doesn't really instill humility. Like, oh, maybe we should simply respect the natural system rather than try to hijack it.
But climate change, Alison.
Yeah, and try to take it apart at every single molecule and reassemble it.
But I mean, she said in her thing, you know, she's like climate change. So we have to save. We have to be prepared, because she was like, how this is going to react under climate change. So like in her mind, she's already framing it as these fungal networks are under threat, and we're actually here to help stop that threat by understanding it.
Yeah, and I mean, all the kind of the whole, I think it'll come up later, but the Jerry Olson, his paper on carbon cycling and other things, and like the mathematical modeling of ecological data it's a very, very highly cited paper, and is like a basis for a lot of the environmental scientists around like the whole carbon cycle and the carbon credits and all that sort of thing. So when she's talking about the their work on the amount of carbon in different types of ecosystems of the fungal networks and whatnot, it's all comes right out of Oak Ridge and those early studies and Manhattan Project. But yeah, when I first saw it, I didn't know anything about Hutchinson or those energy diagrams, and so like now it makes so much more sense. I mean, I got the sense of it, but it really deepens once you understand the context. And I'll have it later, but we'll talk about what like the Arise project, and like because she's talking at a conference for this project called Arise in the Netherlands. That's about basically making like a computational database and tracking system to try to catalog all multicellular life in the Netherlands, called Arise. But
yeah, I noticed the Arise was in the DNA strand, the lettering in their logo. I was looking at that when I was.
It all. So this, to me, this sums it up. Do you recognize these guys, Leo?
No, those
this is
different ones. I don't know those.
This is from when I went out to the Great Swamp National Wildlife Area between Belcourt and Nokia Bell Labs. I stopped off and I got one of the little lavender fungi. But like, to me, like, it's so disrespectful of the natural biological process of like the actual fungal networks, like what it really is. It's just abstracted into, you saw her modeling, right? That simulation modeling. And I feel like those relationalities and how they had that 3D diagram, was supposed to look so, I don't know, maybe impressive. For me, it just looked like a mess, right? Like, I think all of our relationships with everything is just going to be like, look, here's a model, like here's a crystalline, like squiggly line thing that represents you in this moment, in, timestamp, boom, moving on. And that's like the Claude Shannon information theory version of the world, which is, he's the IEEE guy, like, I'm going to have circuits and frequency and information processing, and everything is going to be reduced to information and information management. And later on, when we get to that slide from the Oak Ridge about like the whole system that was set up to manage the technical information, like this is all related to the information management and distribution. But if you take it to the level of your life is a series of files that are being managed and distributed with permissioned access or not, like everything in the world becomes accessible or inaccessible based on some sort of electrical equation. And anyway, to me, those two images just really lay out the different futurities.
I just want to mention too of Claude Shannon. So he did his PhD project at Cold Spring Harbor Labs, which is where a lot of the early genetic works, and later on the Watson and Crick and getting the structure of DNA of stuff. But his PhD thesis was on, it was essentially like creating algorithms for Mendelian genetics. I forget how to pronounce that, but it's like a kind of the classical
genetic
structuring. Yeah, it was genetic algorithms, and this was before they had DNA figured out or anything.
Like, I don't think people understand, like, I mean, I'm still getting like more grounded in it, but like when I was doing my education work, there was this guy, Pavel Leksha, with the Global Education Futures Forum, and he was trained in evolutionary economics. And I didn't really know what that meant, like evolutionary economics, but now it's becoming clearer and clearer that like game theory, genetic algorithms, evolution, and viewing life as simply molecules of information that can be moved around, like that is literally what they're planning, like using information theory to create new forms of life, and like through algorithms, and like how people who are working in that space think it's okay. I mean, of course they all say it's about curing cancer or Parkinson's or whatever, like that's how they talk about it, but they must know it's not just that.
Well, I'm still going to disagree with you on that. When you always say they must know, and I just don't. I think that the majority of people that are working in this, they are people that do have a conscience. It's just they can't know. I mean, because if they really knew, like,
or maybe they think it's good. Maybe they think everyone will be optimized, be their best self or something. Like, yeah, I think that's what they think.
Yeah, I don't know.
There's like all people who think that, like, I
don't know. You can have people pretty high up on the chain there that still don't actually know what their how their piece fits into the larger program, like even pretty high up. And anyway,
well, there's clearly some people
there are clearly people that know how all this this fits together, but
we know, and we're nothing like, I mean, maybe our minds work a little differently than other people.
Your mind, honestly, I wouldn't know. I would still be talking about the health freedom stuff if I hadn't met you, Alison. But I was smart enough to be like, I need to listen to this woman. and Leo too. You've been great. Like
he's 20 years younger than me or more. So,
yeah. Leo, you're way ahead of the curve. When I was your age, I was selling Travelers Insurance.
Well, I'm not going to get into all of this, but I encourage people, like when you get the slide deck, click around in this map, because essentially this is sort of linking with the ecological economics and the nature-backed currency. A lot of this is built off of slides that like Leo's slides and people that I've sort of filled in. But this idea of thermoeconomics and energy transfer and heat transfer, because that's something that came up. Like Leo, you had that paper about the stable coins and the Maxwell's Demon box, and somehow creating free energy by outsourcing, erasing the energy on the blockchain to some other system, which is likely going to be a person at some point. Like we'll be like doing our PCR wearable, whatever energy to erase the data off the free energy machine. And it's so sustainable, right? Like all of the billionaires pushing like early intervention and pay for success, repurposed drugs, they'll all be about probably the blockchain, quantum thermodynamic, alternative energy space. But it goes back to this guy. And I know, Jason, you were going to look into him at some point, this Frederick Soddy. And I don't know if you came across him too, Leo, was that he was.
I read some of his work, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know I haven't actually read it, but he was. Yeah, you want to say who he is?
Oh, I don't really know super well. I don't remember his like background. I mean, he was Canadian, or he was in Canada for a lot of his research. He studied in Canada, right?
Yeah. I think he was British, but he did his research there.
He was like an early physicist that he worked on a lot of nuclear stuff, but it was before any of it was like dialed in, before World War II, but he kind of knew that was inevitable, that nuclear power and likely like weaponization of it was like going to happen. And then he sort of transitioned into economics and had like kind of a distinctive sort of chemical, energetic perspective on economics, and sort of abandoned physics in some ways. But yeah, you go on this.
Well,
that's pretty much it.
What piqued my interest was he was actually writing about money. Now, historically, there are very few, there's literally only a handful of people over the past 150 years who actually write about money. Not monetary policy, but like money itself, like the design of money, monetary theory. There are literally just a handful of people in the past 150 years who actually write on this. So that's where I was like, whoa, he's got like a bunch of stuff writing about money itself.
There's a lot on the Wayback Machine. Like you can get them on the Wayback Machine.
Yeah. Archive.org. The Wayback Machine is really just for looking up old websites.
Oh yeah.
But it's the Internet Archive is the nonprofit organization. The website's archive.org. The Wayback Machine is one of their little things that they do, which is really just cataloging websites. So just anyway. But yeah, they've got a lot of good stuff there.
To understand the interfacing between biology, radiology, isotope tracking, and economics, like this map, and then the way in which people interface with nature, and that's all going to be commodified, like the direct relationships. And this is the thing that I've had some challenges with people. And I'm not saying that all the bad things like mining and oil drilling are going away anytime soon. But until we can actually pivot from that being the priority to like molecular bioprospecting or new other sorts of invasive forms of co-optation of life that look different. Like to me, they feel like just as much of a violation, but they're happening like on a nanoscale or a conceptual scale or a geofencing aspect, or these currencies are a new form of predation that's just as violent and problematic as the extraction industries that we have now, but they're going to be sold as sustainable, and I find them highly problematic, and that's why I think like these interspecies currencies and the sensor networks are so important, because ultimately they're going to be driving the the genetic algorithmic changes too, right? They'll probably start to refine biological processes of both animals and plants and us in relationship to each other to some optimized outcome that we have no control over.
You know, we should start a series called Sit With It. Because with me, a lot of it's like you can say something. It's like, no. Just stop, slow down, listen to what I just said, and sit with that for a minute, because a lot of this is, it's like there's a lot of processing involved. We're always like, this is how I understand the world, and then this new thing comes in, and then you just glom it on top of your understanding. And so like some of this stuff in terms of how to look at the world and how the world operates, it changes it. So like, yeah, it's like, do just like one sentence and then like, okay, everybody, we're going to let this run for about 10 minutes. Sit with that.
Well, I have to hustle because I know Leo's got to get out. So I just get Huxley.
Yeah, I have
this is
an hour.
eugenics.
Okay.
Yeah. So why don't we skip to Leo? But this is like the niche. Let me just do the gamified plant stuff. So niche. This is Laksha again. Niche construction, the reconsideration of organization and environmental action. So he's the transhumanist. He's working on education. He is talking about niches and environments in terms of corporate culture, but I think this very much relates to the ODMs. And can we play this one? This is 1 minute. This is the gamified cellular function that I think is a super important slide. And they took this down, Leo. The original isn't there anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, this went away. It was the University
really?
of Birmingham. And it disappeared because I went back to the original because I always like to source link to the original, and it got
Today,
pulled.
we're going to explore renewable
Hold on,
versus
sorry.
Is
glad
it
I
still on
energy
YouTube, though?
sources.
Like, will
This is my YouTube.
Oh,
This is
right.
my screen. Like, I scanned it and uploaded it to my channel, but I wanted to link to the original so people can go back, and it's gone.
Hang on.
Wow.
I'm almost there. Okay.
So this is important to think about: hedge funds, sensor networks, optical sensors, gene editing, remote gene editing, possibly like photonic communication and game theory. Like this is all the stuff that's wobbling around in this world. This clip is only 1 minute.
Okay.
Fellow in the School of Biosciences.
Sorry.
I'm George Basil, Birmingham Research Fellow in the School of Biosciences at the University of Birmingham. My lab is interested in understanding how plants grow at a molecular and biophysical level. Advances in 3D gaming hardware and high-resolution microscopy have enabled us to establish measurable links between the genes and proteins that plants produce and how their cells grow. We can use these data to help us develop computational models of plant growth and digitally recreate observed plant behaviors. These computer models of virtual growing plants can serve as blueprints for understanding how plant growth is controlled at a genetic and biophysical level. Plants are an essential source of our food and energy, and understanding how they develop is becoming increasingly important as the world population rapidly expands. These models can be used to guide the re-engineering of crop plants to produce more food on less land.
Yeah. So it's a game. They use it in the simulation model.
Go ahead.
Sorry, that's all I got.
Okay.
But that's crazy with hers together, like those two clips.
Hey everybody, so this is Jason. I am live here. I wanted to come on real quick and just kind of explain. So we had recorded, we actually did this whole series in three different recordings, and this was the second recording. And then what happened was Leo had to take off, so we ended up doing the last part of the presentation that had his slides in it, because Alison had a lot more slides. So we're going to do 2 more of these live streams, but they're, of course, pre-recorded. And so the next one, I don't know exactly the date. It'll be Monday or Tuesday for the next one. And then the third one will be on Wednesday morning. So check back on this channel. And the next one is just going to be Alison and I. Leo wasn't there with us for that recording. He couldn't make that one. And then the last one will be all 3 of us again. So it'll be the tail end of this recording. So just to, it might seem a little confusing, but that's what was going on. So